This is Derrick Broze. This is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance. I'm here in Standing Rock.
That man is wanted in 5 different countries: Chile, Argentina, Brazil.
We've been fighting a long time. We have all lost so very much. So many loved ones gone.
Don't you fucking tease that horse!
You are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. Above all, stay alive. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and tonight I'm going to be talking with you about 2 news stories that I found from NBC News, which are clear examples of propaganda, clear examples of how psyops like the Qanon phenomenon, which many people fell for, has been used to poison the well and to delegitimize legitimate research into topics like ritual sexual abuse of children, child trafficking, and yes, sometimes claims of Satanism. So we're going to be getting into all that and more tonight here on, well, let's get that focused, here on The Conscious Resistance. First, though, I want to remind you guys to bookmark my website, theconsciousresistance.com, theconsciousresistance.com. Guys, for those of you who might have only joined following my work, wherever you're following the last years, I've been doing this for 12 years. I started doing journalism and activism in 2010. I launched the Conscious Resistance Network, this website you see here at theconsciousresistance.com, in 2013. And it is the home where you can find my documentaries, my podcasts, my books you can download for free, and interviews I've done, articles I've done, essays, so much that I've done over the years. So I encourage you, if you're ever looking for content, you want to get, dive into the rabbit hole of various topics, come to theconsciousresistance.com. Search bar. If you want to just search random topics, you'll see what I've reported on it. You can also just come here to this helpful menu we've got. You can click on the investigations I've done. It breaks it down by topic. The documentaries I've done, again, my books. You can learn more about the philosophy that guides my activism, agorism. And you can also watch my presentations, some of the speeches and talks I've given over the years. And then you can scroll down here, and we got it broken down by category: the pyramid of power, 5G, the Epstein network, the Finder's cult, agorism, motivational, some of my more motivational, inspirational talks, COVID-19 reporting I've done over the last 2+ years, and then, of course, the surveillance state. All of that can be found at theconsciousresistance.com. You can also, if you so choose, go to theconsciousresistance.com/invest. And if you like the work that I do, guys, I don't have Patreon. I don't have most of the platforms that many other people do. The only way I get support is through you, either through crypto for those who want to send in crypto, or I have a P.O. box based in Texas. You can send me letters, love mail, hate mail. You can send me cash. You can don't send me checks. You can send me equipment if you don't need it, and maybe I'll put it to use. All that information is at theconsciousresistance.com/invest. Okay, so with all of that said, let's talk about this topic here. So today I'm doing some research, just reading around, and I noticed, for one, I found this one article from this journalist, allegedly, for NBC News, who is reporting that all of the talks that I've been reporting on the last couple months, the discussions about potential rituals, child sexual abuse in Utah, that investigation that if you've been following my work recently, you know what I'm talking about, that was announced by the Utah Sheriff's Department back in July, early June. All of that is just simply satanic panic and nothing to see here, nothing for you to worry about. Don't pay any attention to that. This article was published by Brandy Zadrozny for NBC News. Apparently, she's a senior reporter at NBC News. She's got 100 and something thousand followers on Twitter. And this article she wrote is called "The Satanic Panic is Making a Comeback, Fueled by QAnon Believers and GOP Influencers." And so that article first caught my attention, and we're going to cover that. But I also happened to stumble across this other NBC News article that is a similar tone. Michigan man who killed his wife went down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories after Trump's 2020 loss, daughter says. Now, this is an interesting example of propaganda, and I'm going to do you a favor tonight and break this down for you so that anybody who happens to come across a family member who might share this and say, look, you're getting sucked into these dangerous rabbit holes, you can tell them how this is just clearly propaganda. Okay, so let's look at this, and then we'll get into the satanic panic claims. Again, This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. Please bookmark theconsciousresistance.com to get this report and future reports. So now notice how the title right away, it wants you to know a couple of things. This man killed his wife. He was a conspiracy theorist who got lost down the rabbit hole. He thought Trump lost, was a Trump supporter. And then that's according to his daughter. Now, I don't know anything about his daughter. Maybe she said these things, and maybe they are true, that he was into, investigating the 2020 election and things of this sort. But I'm going to show you how none of that has anything to do with the actual story, which is that this man killed his wife. There's no clear evidence, and the cops even say it way down at the bottom of the article, that there's no evidence that his motive had anything to do with his political beliefs. But they want you to know, though, by the way, this man who killed his wife, it might have just been an argument, a fit of rage. People do have that. They argue, and then people end up harming each other in relationships. That does happen. But because he happens to be apparently a QAnon guy, then they have to put that in the headline. They add Igor Lanis, I think is how you say his name, became obsessed with QAnon and the deep state before gunning down his wife, nearly killing their daughter, and then being fatally shot by police, his other daughter says. So again, they spend a couple of the first paragraphs explaining that this guy's a conspiracy theorist. He believed, quote, deep state forces stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump, staged mass shootings and the fake January 6th riot, and hatched plots to harm Americans with vaccines and 5G technology. Rebecca Lanis told NBC on Wednesday. That's his daughter, 25 years old. She said early Sunday morning, the two women were about to drive away from their home, but not before Igor Lanis opened fire with the shotgun. And this is with the other daughter, Rachel Lanis, 25 years old. The daughter, Rachel, she's the one that was there. And then the wife gets killed by the husband. Well, now the other daughter is saying, well, by the way, my dad was, a conspiracy theorist. But as you get into it, again, multiple shots. He shot multiple times in the back. It appears she was also attempting to flee out the front door. So the husband obviously was not a stable guy. And the daughter suspects, without evidence, but suspects that mother and sister and father could have been arguing about politics or conspiracy theories, but she hasn't asked her surviving sister yet. So just speculation, but just throw it in there because it'll plant the seed in people's minds that somehow this has to do something with conspiracy theorists. And then she says, I just didn't want to know. I don't really want to know. And then she says that he was a normal Trump-supporting Detroit guy, but then when the 2020 election came along, he started watching One America News and getting into rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and QAnon and starting with the stolen election. And then he started talking about worse things like 5G, the vaccine, and everything. And he started believing, quote, the deep state stole the election and that there's a worldwide cabal out to get conservatives. And it says that the daughter blamed her father's mental state on QAnon, but says that the widespread conspiracy theory about many things was responsible as well. And she also said that, her father opposed vaccines and even 5G. So there you go. They want to make it kind of conflate that. This guy's a murderer and he's against vaccines. You don't want to be like that. He's against 5G, questions 5G. The daughter's like, he thought it was going to kill us. And so they basically just paint it like this is like radicalized, right? So the whole article is focusing on this, right? Again, the main point here is a man has killed his wife. What does any of this have to do with it? We have no evidence. And as the daughter admits, there's no evidence they were arguing about QAnon, that he killed his wife because he thought, she was a part of the cabal or anything like that, but they want the picture to be painted. Now, way here at the bottom, the last section of the article, that says no motive yet, sheriff's investigators said. The Oakland County Sheriff's Department has declined this week to speculate on what might have prompted Igor Lanis to open fire. Yeah, and so this crappy NBC journalist instead is going to speculate for you and make it insinuate that it had something to do with this person's political beliefs or the conspiracy theories that they believe in, allegedly, right? But do you understand what I'm saying here? This is how the media works. Now, this is my problem with some of the conspiracy truth movement, freedom movement, is that people think that everything on the mainstream news is fake, and then they go to the other end like, oh, well, if it's on independent media and they're censoring it, then it must be real. Sorry, guys, it's not really strong logic. And typically the mainstream media doesn't just lie directly. Sometimes they do that, but a lot of times they give half-truths, mistruths. And in this case, they tell a story, but it's the way that they present it. And that's what's tricky about it, because technically all the facts are there, right? Yes, okay, this guy might have been into QAnon. He might have questioned the election, and he killed his wife and this and that. But what do the two things have to do with each other? As far as we know, nothing. But they want that picture to be painted. And they only spend one or two lines saying that, you know, they have no idea why this happened. They're not going to speculate on a motive. The detectives are looking in his phone, trying to understand what prompted this. We will update as necessary, they say, once they can determine a narrative. But then they go to some professor from Michigan University to talk about misinformation and talk about how conspiracy theories radicalize people, QAnon's tearing families apart, this and that, right? Do you understand what's happening here? I mean, they could have easily just wrote this article about like a tragic situation, this man and killed his wife. We don't really know why yet at the moment. That would have been the responsible journalistic thing to do. Instead, they want to rush to make it seem like the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories is responsible for this man's actions. And by proxy, it's meant to make you look crazy and say, well, if you believe similar things about vaccines or 5G or the election, you question those things, or if you're into anything QAnon adjacent, right? Because the next story that I'm going to show you from that journalist, if you want to call her that, about the Satanic Panic, is another example of how the media lies and the way that they take legitimate stories and then they try to muddy the waters and poison the well with something like QAnon. And for those who followed my work for 5 or so years, you can go to theconsciousresistance.com and you can check out the QAnon reports I've done. Just search QAnon and you can see that for years in the beginning, I started putting out videos debunking this. Here's a video, QAnon the Patriots, January 2020, how QAnon has poisoned the well and stoked division, October 2020, disproving QAnon evidence, number 1, the problem with QAnon, David Wilcock and Alex Jones, number 2, and the problem with QAnon, David Wilcock, Benjamin Fulford, Michael Flynn, QAnon, and D5. These are just some examples of the work I've done over the years, disproving and debunking that psyop. So that's the reason they do these stories, though, and that's the reason I think many of us suspect that the whole QAnon narrative was put out there, was to poison the well and to make legitimate stories like the research I've been doing for the past 4 months about the sheriff's investigation in Utah into, in their words, ritualized child sexual abuse. And my 5-part investigation into that looked at that case. It looked at the claims about the man named David Lee Hamblin, who the media won't name. And if you want to know more about that, you got to go read those articles or videos. You can find that at theconsciousresistance.com. I don't want to make this video a deep dive on this case, but it is relevant because, as I'm going to show you here in this article, which is designed to make it sound like these claims are all satanic panic. For those who don't know what that means, back in the 70s and 80s, it was when more and more people were starting to become aware of claims of ritual abuse by what were deemed satanic cults. Now, I'm not here to say whether or not that terminology of calling them satanic, I think that term is overwrought and sometimes used for things that are not truly satanic in the sense of somebody worshiping somebody called Satan, but are just are ritualistic still. There's ritual going on, but it might not quite be so-called satanic. But the point is, people started to report this. Children started to speak up about this, about tunnels under the McMartin preschool. And I've covered this again. If you go to theconsciousresistance.com, if you search Satanic Panic, you'll find an interview I've done. I did a couple years ago with my buddy John Brissom. He is one of the other researchers, along with myself, who've researched the finders. The Truth About Satanic Panic with author John Brissom. I encourage you to go back and watch that. And we put that out because there was a book that came out called We Believe the Children. And then there was Satanic Panic talk, and it was basically trying to debunk the Satanic Panic. And so in this interview with John Brissom, we debunk that work and show how actually in the 80s there were legitimate cases, including, you go back here and you go to the documentaries on the Conscious Resistance. For those who haven't seen my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, I released it in March 2019. It's about the Finders cult that was involved in the 80s with trafficking children. It was covered up by the Central Intelligence Agency and the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency. And I don't say those words lightly. We have 100% documented evidence of that. All the information is in the documentary. All the documents, I've made them available online for free. You can check them out if you search the Finders Archive on my website. So my point with saying all that is that they want you to believe that it was just a so-called satanic panic. They wanted us to believe that it was just conservative, silly conservative people in the 80s who got scared of stranger danger, and then that evolved into this theory that the satanic panic, right, that people were just making up stuff, and kids were just making up, the idea that they were being raped and abused and forced to abort their babies after being made pregnant, and witnessing babies' heads smashed and witnessing babies, being eaten alive. These are not Derrick Broze's words. These are claim testimony of some of these victims. And in fact, guys, I have some evidence that perhaps I'll share on this video if you remind me before it's over, so that I have not released yet. A video that was also sent to me, an old report from the 80s, probably early 90s, talking about these claims, interviewing with children. Children do not have it in their mind to just make it up that they're being surrounded with this ritualistic abuse, and there's these cults around them praying and I mean, the things that are in some of and this tape that I have, but also in the documents related to this Utah case. I don't think children can just make these things up. Now, what the mainstream wants you to believe is that there was something called false memory syndrome, and that the people who were saying that they were abused, the children had been planted false memories. And so now I'm not here to defend every case. I only know for certain McMartin Preschool, the Franklin scandal we know about. We know about the Finders case, and I'm not saying every one of these incidents had a so-called satanic or ritualistic element. And again, I do distinguish between those two, because just because it's not a Christian thing, oftentimes I've seen a lot of Christians and religious folk, if it's something they don't understand, they call it satanic, even if that's not really accurate. But they don't all necessarily involve that component, but they do involve abuse of children, networks, trafficking of kids, and being covered up by governments. That's what these cases have in common. The Finders, the Franklin scandal, the McMartin Preschool, and others. And these cases get lumped in with this so-called satanic panic. So perhaps there were cases where after a hysteria began, once the real cases got out, some people made up things for attention. Sure, that could happen. But to act as if everything that was reported on in the 80s was lies is absolute bullshit. And that is what this article here from, what is her name again? Let's get this back on screen. Brandy Zadronsky, who I have over here on Twitter, tweeting about this all day. And let me just show you guys this before we get into some of the article. You know, she's complaining that ever since she published this article, now her inbox is filled with a bunch of people accusing her of being, here she says, my inbox is full of randos calling me a satanic pedophile. That could be true, maybe not, but maybe it's because, as I told her here on Twitter, it's because your article is bullshit. I said the article you wrote is horrible. You waited till about 10 paragraphs down to acknowledge that the Utah sheriffs have an ongoing investigation. You focused on David Levitt and Rossi, which have nothing to do with the core of the case. And I'm going to explain this, what I mean by that in just a moment. But I just think it's interesting. She published this, and then, you know, it's getting incredible stories. Satanic panic is back. That this time it's changing elections outcomes, riding the wave of QAnon. You see how they want to associate it with QAnon? That's the way to dismiss it, to demean it. And then look, she's retweeting somebody with a GIF that says, it's, you know, some guy in the devil costume says, "Don't drag my good name into your sick fantasies." Wow, it's great. And then coincidentally, she also retweeted the article that I just covered a moment ago about this guy killing his wife and allegedly being sucked down the rabbit hole. Let me just go ahead and type this to her right now since she wants to share this. What? Okay, I'll have to see if they'll let me comment. Maybe she's closed. She's closed the comments. Interesting. Oh, not surprised. Well, anyways, so this is the woman that wrote this article here, Satanic Panic Making a Comeback, Fueled by QAnon Believers and GOP Influencers. I'm not going to read the article to you, but all I want to show you is that, look, from the very first step, on June 1st, David Levitt, the prosecuting attorney for Utah County, stood behind a lectern in his windowless Provo office before a gaggle of reporters. Wearing a gray suit and an exasperated look, he wanted to make something categorically clear. Neither he nor his wife were guilty of murdering or cannibalizing young children. And this, again, is related to this Utah investigation that I did. You can see if you go to thelastamericanvagabond.com, you look at the browser, the menu, the navigation, Broze series, go down to Utah Ritual Sexual Abuse Investigation. You can read all 5 of my parts of this investigation and get caught up on the whole situation. I encourage you to do that because I'm not going to be really breaking down what it is, you know, what the whole thing is. But essentially, the Utah County Sheriff's Office announced that they were investigating ritualized child sexual abuse. Within days of that, Utah County Attorney David Levitt holds a press conference saying, as they just noted, "My wife and I are not cannibals. We're not murderers. We promise." And everybody was like, okay, why did you say that? Where is that coming from? Because the Utah County Sheriffs, they had only announced that they were investigating ritualized child sexual abuse. They hadn't named any suspects, including David Levitt. He just sort of put himself in the mix. And still the sheriffs have refused, you know, they haven't commented on whether or not he's involved or he's a suspect or what role he's in, because they're trying to have a legitimate investigation, it appears. And they've said they've received over 130 tips from people in this investigation, right? So David Levitt just sort of inserted himself, and it made things really weird. And he basically was passing out a 151-page document which names him and his wife, accuses them. This 151-page document relates to a case from 2012 against a man named David Lee Hamblin, who was a therapist who was accused of raping several people, including his own children. And in the case against David Lee Hamblin, when they started to interview witnesses, they took hundreds of statements from these witnesses. There's at least, I think, 5 to 6, potentially 8 witnesses, and there's at least 8 different statements, some of them as long as 151 pages, detailing numerous incidents of abuse. And like I said, how would somebody just create 18 different examples of abuse, just make it all up in their mind? And these describe a sex cult, a ritual sex cult involved in different counties in Utah. And it does accuse David Levitt and his wife of being involved in this and of raping young girls. So with all that said, we still don't know if that has anything to do with the county sheriff's investigation into ritual sexual abuse. So for whatever reason, David Levitt thought it was worth bringing up. My guess is he got tipped off. Somebody told him they're investigating you, and he thought it might be a great idea to try to get ahead of it. Instead, he made himself look crazy. And he tried to blame it and say, they're just trying to get rid of me because there was an election coming up, the primary in June in Utah. And he said, they're just doing this because it's political. They're accusing, me of this and that to try to get rid of me, even though nobody accused him. He did end up losing his election. He will not be county attorney come January. And as I show in my article, let me see, I think it's number 3, that we actually have evidence now that David Levitt lied. And we found out that he is actively under investigation by the Department of Homeland Security relating to an adoption that he was involved in of a young Native American girl that has been in his family for years now. I think it's part 4 of my investigation. I'm pulling up. Yeah, part 4. David Levitt under suspicion, investigation for suspicion of human trafficking. This was reported on by the local news. So David Levitt lost, and then the local news reports, Fox 13 reports, that he is under suspicion for this adoption scheme, where he basically admits that he, at the least, he bent the rules, if not broke the law, to get himself a young Native American girl. And basically what he says is that he went to a reservation and told them, hey, you know what, I've got friends in Ukraine, because it's really weird as well. David Levitt has some pretty strong Ukraine connections, including through his Levitt Foundation, which apparently has a home in Ukraine. And when this whole Ukraine conflict recently started, he went to Ukraine to his apartment to recover his things before it got too hot, allegedly. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. But David Levitt basically told them, look, I have contacts in Ukraine, and since you guys in the reservation in Montana have a lot of buffalo, I can sell them your buffalo, sweeten the deal for you if you help me get this young girl. And so he admits to that. And that video was released. And then as well in the same report, let me scroll down here, they also show that a Homeland Security officer has filed a whistleblower complaint, basically saying that he was actively working on an investigation. Where's his name right here? Noel Angles, former analyst with Homeland Security Investigations, confirmed his team had been investigating sexual allegations against Levitt for several years. Then in 2020, he received a copy of this video where David Levitt's talking about the adoption. He added this to the case file, investigating Levitt on suspicion of human trafficking. Then he says 5 months after that, the video and the documents were removed. And then when he tried to speak out, he says he was terminated. He filed a whistleblower complaint. So, there's a lot going on here. And I cover all this in my articles. I've covered this in previous videos. My point is, does this lady mention any of this in this article that wants you to think that these claims against David Levitt, which he himself said, oh, I'm not a cannibal, she spends this whole article trying to make it sound like it's just so crazy. This is just the moral panic of the 1980s. Hysteria and hypervigilance led to false investigations and false imprisonments. And of course, it was boosted by QAnon, blah, blah. You see how they're doing this? She doesn't mention that, hey, by the way, David Levitt's under investigation for potential trafficking of children through this adoption scheme. Oh, yeah, by the way, it wasn't just some random QAnon people making things up. It was the sheriff. And so here she goes again, trying to obfuscate. Get down here. She's like, consider how things unfolded for David Levitt. Now, what I'm about to read to you is absolute lies. This is not true. This woman is publishing garbage. I mean, surprise, surprise, right? But I mean, it just infuriates me. Somebody like me who is independently funded only by you guys really strives to do actual journalism. And I've been following this story since June, and I've been investigating it, and I've got more information coming out soon. And this woman can just come here and write this article and just make it sound like garbage. I mean, it's just infuriating. She claims, and again, this is false, the rumors started on YouTube when Nicholas Rossi, an American who has been accused of faking his death and escaped to Scotland to evade rape charges in Utah. That's a whole weird case. I didn't even mention that in my 5-part articles, that guy's, whatever his role is, because that guy, Nicholas Rossi, he has this crazy story. He's supposedly this man in Scotland who is really an American disguising himself, and he's on the run. But he has been speaking out against David Levitt as well. But he's not the one who released the documents. The documents came from the Provo Police Department. I got copies of those documents. Myself and Ryan, we made them available on the Last American Vagabond website. If you read through my articles, you'll see the links to them. The 151-page documents, the victim statements, allegations from the 2012 case against a man named David Lee Hamlin that does name Utah County Attorney David Levitt, right? But this woman tries to say, oh, it's this one YouTuber. He leaked these documents. He posted videos in which he accused David Levitt and his wife of leading a ritual sex abuse cult. Levitt was overseeing an effort to extradite him. As evidence for this, Rossi posted a 151-page statement made a decade ago by an unnamed woman as part of a criminal case against a therapist. That was later dismissed. But again, here's the way they lie. They give you a little bit of the truth. It was dismissed, but it was dismissed without prejudice. It wasn't dismissed because he was not guilty. It wasn't dismissed because it was lacking in evidence. It was dismissed because the local police departments were dragging their feet. And this is all in my articles. They were dragging their feet, so they couldn't actually get the information they needed to prosecute the man named David Lee Hamlin. So he's still out there. Now, the Utah County Sheriff's latest investigation that they announced a couple months ago, it might involve that, but we don't know because they're not speaking publicly about it. And then, so here they finally mentioned NBC obtained these public records via Provo Police Department, which include gory allegations of sexual abuse and mass murder from the 1980s and 90s. Not just by the therapist, but by more than a dozen of other members of the Provo community, including David Levitt and his wife. So it takes them 10 paragraphs in, and here we are in the 11th paragraph where they finally admit the accusations are part of a new case from Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith. Smith backed his opponent, blah, blah. Basically, again, they took this long to tell you, oh, by the way, this didn't just start because some guy said something on YouTube. This started because the sheriff of Utah County announced he was investigating ritualized child sexual abuse as far back as 1990. And oh, here they finally mentioned the still open investigation has netted more than 130 tips from the public, according to sheriff spokesperson. And it just goes on. And they kind of talk about how David Levitt gave a press conference and he was holding back tears because he said how the accusations had hurt his wife. And then they interview his wife and they go on and they talk about Satanism and QAnon. And you go further down, they talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they get into talking about drag queen story time and Satanism and Lil Nas X. And then they talk about how some people believe that Travis Scott's Astroworld crazy event was a ritual of some sorts. Hey, I'm not totally, out of the woods. If I don't know if I doubt that. It could be true. But the point is they start to go through all these different areas, and the whole thing is designed to make this seem like it's one mass of just confused people and satanic accusations. But the whole first part of this article is based on a very real event. The Utah County Sheriff's is investigating ritual child sexual abuse in Utah in several different counties going back to the 1990s. This is not just the Utah County Sheriff's Office, some random guy doing this. It's also involving state authorities and federal authorities. We also know that the man that they named in there that they want you to feel sympathetic for, David Levitt, is under investigation by the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. So why is none of that mentioned in this article? Well, obviously we know, guys. The whole point is to make this seem crazy. I don't know why NBC publishes 2 articles within, 2 days of each other. Again, the first one, as I showed you guys, it has nothing to do with conspiracy theories, but they want you to think, oh, this guy killed his wife, and he also believed in QAnon and election, conspiracy theories and stuff like that. And in this one, they want you to believe that all this concern is just satanic panic coming back. It's just, they mention everything from libs of TikTok, there's just all kinds of stuff. They interview a satanic temple member. And so they're obfuscating the issue and trying to mix a whole bunch together. This is how the media lies. And then it just kind of as an example of how poorly this article is by Brandy Zadronsky, who's apparently a former librarian. She needs to go back to the library and stop trying to be a journalist. She issued a correction. A previous version of this article misstated the employer of the local journalist. It is KTSU, the Fox affiliate in Salt Lake City, not Fox News. Is that a big deal? No, but to me, it's just an example that she can't get her facts right. And the fact that she wasted all this text and didn't give people the facts, didn't make it clear way up at the top that this is a real investigation going on by the Utah County Sheriff's Office, and that David Levitt himself is suspected of improper adoption that could potentially be a human trafficking charge. None of that is mentioned in here. Instead, it's all just like, oh, this is just satanic panic, QAnon stuff. Laugh at it. It's so crazy. And then the sad thing is, look, if you go here to her comments, let me go to see if we can check this out. Besides myself calling her out, I mean, there's a lot of, basically normie people saying the 80s hysteria destroyed people's lives. They watched Stranger Things 4 and they thought the jocks were the heroes. As you know, it's just like, thank you for covering this. These people are hopped on these allegations as if it's a drug that they need to have. And the internet is indeed the dealer. And they just go through, just people sort of laughing at it and saying like, please people, we're pretty busy. Set up your altars in your own home and pray there frequently throughout the night. I don't even know what that person means. But it's just like, I really hope that they start attacking music again. What's the equivalent of playing a record backwards now? Listening to a podcast at half speed. They're kind of making fun of this. Because I do think back in the day, there were definitely some parents and people like, I remember Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, going after We're Not Going to Take It. I can't remember their Twisted Sister and stuff like that. I don't support any of that. I'm not like a conservative coming at this like, oh, the horror, like everything's satanic or anything like that. But no, I'm coming to this as a journalist who has investigated the Finders cult, who has done actual research, as I showed you earlier, on the Satanic Panic. Go watch that interview with John Brisson, who has been researching this Utah case for the last 4 months now. You can go search Utah on my website and you're going to get my 5-part investigation into this case involving David Levitt. And then, of course, my most recent investigation into sexual abuse involving the Mormon Church, my justice delayed investigation. These are real incidents, and people are trying to downplay them. They're trying to say that it's all conspiracy theories, it's satanic panic, etc. And look, that's not to say that I believe every claim out there. That's part of the problem of QAnon. QAnon garbage made a whole bunch of bad claims. They had people saying, oh, in New York, whenever they were putting up tents, outside of hospitals, no, those tents are actually to help us escape, help kids escape under the tunnels. And this, QAnon really did muddy the waters and it poisoned the well. And so for some people now, when they hear you talk about a situation like this, or when someone like this, like myself, tries to legitimately report on this, their mind goes to, the first thing they're going to think is, oh, that sounds like QAnon. I don't know, man. That sounds kind of crazy. That's, isn't that QAnon type stuff? Oh, you must think the lizards run the planet too. Oh, did we ever go to the moon? It's just, you get these sort of responses, and that's exactly what a psychological operation does. That's exactly what an operation in general, a propaganda operation does. So I just wanted to do this video to point out, and hopefully I made it clear enough, that those 2 articles, again, one is just about a man murdering his wife, but they bring in his political beliefs, even though the cops say that there's no evidence, that there's no motive at the moment. We don't know if that has anything to do with it. They might find out the wife was cheating on him, and so he killed her, and and he went crazy. It has nothing to do with QAnon. But by the way, they want you to focus on the fact that he's a conspiracy theorist. And then the second one is trying to take a legitimate investigation into ritual sexual abuse in Utah, involving people, in some cases involving the Mormon Church, and make it seem like it's just satanic panic hysteria, nothing to see here. And that's how these people work. They don't always just lie outright. They lie by omission, by obfuscation, and by playing word games. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, guys. And for those of you who appreciate my journalism, and for those of you who might want to learn more of this kind of stuff and maybe even step into the independent journalism realm yourself, guys, I'm going to be launching my own 6-week journalism course coming up November. So maybe I got to put it off a little bit. I'd say November, maybe December, but I'm really excited about this because I've never done anything like this, but I've been doing independent journalism, working on a radio show, writing copy, writing books, writing articles, essays, conducting interviews, man on the street interviews, interviews with podcasts, interviews sitting down with people in person, researching, calling people, emailing, going to universities and to databases to physically pull out files and actually check them in person, things like that. And I have some skills to share. And I want there to be more independent journalists who care about real truth, who don't just want to say whatever they want and don't just want to speculate endlessly, but actually stick to the truth and make it clear when you're speculating and when you can't prove the things you claim. So if you're interested in that, please do go to theconsciousresistance.com, sign up for my email list. I'll probably start announcing details about that in the next couple months or so. I'm working on it behind the scenes as I get time. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.